After Blindside, there's always this moment where the majority looks around and goes, oh, okay, weird. Anyway, back to being in charge.
And that's when they're the most vulnerable.
That sentence, we still have the numbers, has ended more campaigns than bad turnout, bad messaging, and bad candidates combined.
Because it assumes, even though you were just blindsided, nothing else has changed.
And surprise, everything has changed. So today, we're talking about what happens after the blindside. When Plan A collapses, people panic, and you find out whether you actually had a strategy or just vibes.
Welcome back to Outwit, Outplay, Outorganize. I'm Tykee James.
And I'm Claire Douglas. And before we get into Survivor, campaigns, or current events, I want to ground us. This episode is for people who've been in a fight where something unexpected happened. In the 11th hour, a vote flipped, a policy stalled, a coalition partner wobbled, and suddenly the room got quiet in a bad way.
The okay, now what moment of quiet.
Exactly. Last episode was about lanes and execution, how the Davids pulled off the heist in stealing the Goliaths' advantage.
This episode is about the moment after the heist, when the other side should recover.
And what happens when they don't. Before getting into Survivor, let's talk about real life, because a lot of people are watching this dynamic play out right now. In Minneapolis, ICE activity surged at the start of the year. The assumption was simple: authority plus numbers equals control.
And instead, there was public backlash, legal pressure, organizing, media attention, and then the partial pullbacks and confusion that then ensued.
And here's the strategy lesson. The shock wasn't the action. The shock was how many actors realized, oh, we didn't plan for the reaction.
That's a contingency failure.
And this is where campaigns and powerful institutions get tripped up. They plan the move and not the response. They assume compliance. They assume silence. They assume the system will behave the way it did last time.
And because of mass people power being organized, reality is not living up to that assumption in Minneapolis.
Which is why today's episode is about contingency math, not as a trick, but as a discipline. A blindside doesn't end the game. It reveals who planned for the next move. Power doesn't flip because one plan works. It flips because someone already built the second and third.
Two paths to win.
One plan to stay calm. Okay, Survivor context for folks who haven't memorized every single part to this season. It's episode 9. We're in post-merge land. One tribe. The Goliaths came in with more numbers. One of their leaders, John, the mayor of Slamtown, has just been blindsided.
On paper, the Goliaths should be fine.
And this is the moment where majorities usually restabilize and start picking off the minority. Instead, the Davids keep playing like a minority that refuses to accept minority rules.
And it's because the numbers were 7-5. So what can we do? We can bust the game wide open, change the numbers.
Walk us through that, Claire.
With pleasure, Tykee. At Tribal Council, the Davids use multiple advantages in sequence in order to send Dan home. First, Nick plays a vote steal, which lets him take another player's vote and cast it himself. Dan tries to save himself by playing a hidden immunity idol. But then Carl plays an idol nullifier, which cancels Dan's idol. So the protection, it disappears, and Dan goes home.
Who would have thought that there was a daggone idol nullifier? Who's ever heard of that?
What an episode.
It truly is one to watch. But let me slow this down, because this is the whole episode. The Davids didn't gain numbers. They gained control over which votes counted.
So that's process power.
Exactly. The majority still exists. It just couldn't make the decision stick.
Claire, what did the Davids do right at that tribal council?
The Davids didn't just plan what they wanted to happen. They planned for how the Goliaths would react after the first loss.
Which is how most people might react. Panic, overcorrection, and then jumping back to rely on your traditional advantages. Because that's what got you there, right?
Yeah, they assumed the Goliaths would say, well, we still have the numbers, and then play themselves. Instead of persuading harder, the Davids shrunk the impact of the decision by using the rules of the game to steal a vote from the Goliath side.
So fewer votes meant fewer protections for the Goliaths.
Yes, and they also meant that there were fewer assumptions from the Davids. This is contingency math. When they do X, we do Y. If they do Z, we still have an out. And that's not cleverness, it's just discipline.
Now that we heard your perspective about the Davids, can you let us know what the Goliaths did wrong?
This part matters because this might also be where listeners see themselves. After the Davids pull off their heist, the Goliaths treated the blindside as an anomaly, not a signal.
They continue to rely on visible power, their numbers, their immunity idols, and they are a pretty confident bunch.
They sure are, and they assumed yesterday's rules would never change.
So how about this? If the Goliaths hired you to help them, what would you have had them do differently before that tribal council?
Several things. First, I would tell them to recount the vote. In Survivor, this doesn't mean literally going into the little vessel and recounting the ballots. It's rechecking the math and the assumptions behind them. For the Goliaths, in this moment, the danger is acting like the Davids have it locked, when in reality, the Davids' majority is thin and stitched together out of convenience, not deep trust. Recounting means identifying exactly who's truly locked, who is just floating around, and who you can peel off with the right offer. It also means counting votes plus advantages, not just people, but idols, vote steals, extra votes, nullifiers, and the social ability to get someone to play them or not to play them. The Davids just prove that they can coordinate advantages extremely effectively. The Goliath's only path back is to find cracks in that coordination and build a countermajority around one or two Davids who feel undervalued, overruled, or just exposed.
Okay, that's a good start. What else?
So, second, they need to slow the game down. The Davids just won through tempo, fast, coordinated, advantage-driven chaos that left the Goliaths reacting. Slowing the game down is how you can stop the bleeding. Practically, for the Goliaths, it means pushing everyone into longer conversations, make plans for the next two votes, and creating social conditions where people default to safety instead of improv. When the game slows, paranoia rises and coalitions start policing each other. That's good for the Goliaths because the Davids alliance is newly dominant and already showing internal friction. Carl's overconfidence, Gabby's frustrations, Christian's visibility. A slower pace increases the chance that those tensions harden into factions. It also reduces the Davids' biggest weapon, surprise.
Wow, that's typically the best kind of prize, a surprise.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any other advice?
I think there's a couple other steps. So third, I would force predictable procedures. Predictable procedures on Survivor is the enemy of surprise advantages and last-second blindsides. If you're the Goliaths, you want the day to follow a script. You have a morning check-in, and it's clear who's voting where. You have confirmation meetings before tribal and shared expectations that the plans won't change at tribal. Why? Because the Davids' edge has been their ability to weaponize uncertainty. If the Goliaths can normalize a culture of we don't do live tribals, we lock it down by sundown, we confirm in pairs, they reduce the effectiveness of a frantic whisper campaign and advantage ambushes, and predictability also makes it easier to detect when someone is lying, because deviation from the routine becomes a signal. And the last thing I would say is you've got to reduce information access. This is the most underrated one, and it's pure Survivor gold. The David success depends on getting accurate information, sharing them quickly, and coordinating. The Goliaths can't outnumber them easily, so they have to disrupt their information network. That can look like isolating key Davids socially so they can't compare notes. It could be feeding different versions of a plan to different people to detect leaks, pulling Christian or Gabby into long one-on-ones so they miss group strategizing time, or creating false urgency and that frantic energy that can lead to poor decision-making. The goal is to prevent the Davids from achieving the one thing that makes a thin majority powerful: alignment. When information is scarce or inconsistent, people revert to self-protection. They hedge. They make side deals. That is how a majority fractures. And here's the rule. A majority isn't powerful because of the numbers. It's powerful because of the alignment. Break the alignment and the majority, poof, disappears.
Wow, I'm really loving the poof sounds. So the Goliaths can't win by trying to recreate Goliath strong dominance, their original tribe. They win by making the Davids' majority hard to coordinate. They slow the tempo, they make the process rigid, they force tools into the open, and then cutting lines of communication that keep the Davids from moving as one, keeping their alignment difficult to hold. So it seems like all of these, if done correctly, can change the terrain and then offer more paths to victory, in this case for the Goliaths.
That's exactly right. You're a very quick study, Tykee. Losing the vote wasn't the true failure. Failing to adapt after the vote was. And I see this all the time in campaigns, not, of course, for my clients.
Because they knew fundamentals, right?
Yes, I see what you did there. KNEW versus NEW. Yeah.
Yeah, for those listening at home and want to spell it.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's right. I found a new fundamentals to work with coalitions and coach the fundamentals of campaigning. For example, I know it might feel natural, but after losing a vote, you shouldn't just immediately jump into trying to do more to make up for the failure and kind of freak out.
I wish I knew that sooner, because when I was in a similar position, I did send louder emails and I did schedule more meetings. And by louder, I mean...
all caps.
Yeah, there were a couple caps used.
Yeah. And that's adorable, but the move is usually fatal. After a blindside, the move isn't just more energy, it's more clarity.
And now for the favorite segment of our bird-watching listeners, Winning on the Wing. What the Goliaths failed to do was adapt. They could take a lesson from the smaller birds who collectively harass a larger predator like a hawk to drive it away. This is called mobbing, and it often unfolds differently depending on how the large shared threat responds. It can start with one bird detecting that predator, giving out alarm calls, which recruits others. As more birds join, the harassment escalates, hopefully driving away the hawk from the area. However, when that big threat reacts, and it will, the situation changes immediately. At that moment, the smaller birds have to adapt their strategies to scatter abruptly. Rapid dispersal is a wise tactical concession because it makes it difficult for the hawk to lock onto and pursue any single target.
So this isn't disorganization or indecision.
No, not at all. This is an evolutionarily adaptive anti-predator response strategy. After the immediate risk of a counterstrike has passed, the smaller birds may regroup at a safer distance and resume mobbing. Sometimes in a more coordinated way. They may tighten up their flocking formation. This should inform your next direct action tactic.
Wow. And those birds have a more coordinated response than most campaigns. And what's most powerful isn't just that they're persistent, it's they're flexible. They don't rely on a single tactic. They shift based off of conditions.
Go birds. And then Survivor gives us the pivot.
At this point in the season, chaos has peaked. The sides are even. Discipline matters again. But even is misleading. The numbers are tied, but the terrain isn't. The Davids have momentum. They just executed one of the cleanest advantage plays in recent memory. The Goliaths are fractured, humbled, and publicly turning on one another. That matters more than math.
Christian wins one of the longest endurance challenges ever. And this is pretty intense even for Survivor standards.
Christian has just won individual immunity after 5.5 epic hours.
And remember, Christian is the nerdy guy, not expected to win on these, more physical challenges, but he does, which is not a flashy strategy. It's the staying power that matters. And the staying power means political power. Alec is fighting for his life in that challenge. He knows he's the likely target. But even when he goes toe-to-toe with Christian for 5.5 hours, even when their tanks are empty, the structural problem doesn't change. Winning immunity could have saved him. Not winning means the majority path holds.
Morale shifts. They all get letters from home. The game slows down emotionally. Everybody remembers why they're there. Tell us, Claire, what happens next in Survivor?
Earlier in the merge, players like Alec, Allison, and Kara have had leverage because the Davids needed them to survive. Their promises had value. Once the Davids evened out the numbers and exposed the cracks in the Goliath alliance, that leverage disappeared. The Davids no longer needed swing votes. When a coalition no longer needs you, your bargaining power collapses. That is what happened to Alec's group. Angelina understood this quickly and moved to join the Davids. Alec, Allison, and Kara were slower. And by the time they tried to regain footing, the market had shifted. The Davids had held structural control. They could simply choose which Goliath to remove next.
So instead of pulling another wild move, another heist, the Davids chose a clean, stabilizing vote.
I'm not fixing to sugarcoat things. The next vote is Alec. It should not be no turns, no detours.
Exactly. No theatrics, no advantages, no scrambling. Just 5 votes stacked on Alec. This is the shift from insurgency to governance. When you've spent weeks fighting uphill, chaos feels powerful. But once you get the majority, chaos is liable, so you need to stabilize.
Alec goes home, and it feels inevitable. Not because he played badly, but because he ran out of leverage.
This is the second path to win. After surviving chaos, you consolidate. You convert your invisible power, relationships, coordination, trust, into visible control. You stop asking, can we survive this vote? And start asking, who leads next? By For Survivor standards, it was a boring vote.
Well, you kind of want boring votes, I guess, because it's clear roles, no surprises.
Yeah, and a majority that understands the math. That's how the Davids prove they're not scrappy underdogs. They're a governing coalition now.
The Davids have swung the game completely in our favor, and we have all the power in the world now.
Which is terrifying for the opposition.
And the scariest thing for your opponents isn't your big move. It's when they realize you don't need them anymore.
A part of being adaptable is having multiple paths to victory.
Yes, if you have a path to victory, that means you can name them clearly. Path 1, disrupt to survive.
Path 2, consolidate to win.
Serious campaigns know when to switch. The mistake isn't changing strategy.
It's not knowing when to change it. It's okay to have two paths. Having more than one path can be a good thing.
And depending on the complexity, you may have multiple paths.
And that's why you gotta know how to pick between them and how to name them.
And which one to do first, second, or third. It goes back to sequencing. Okay, let's say your coalition loses a vote. Your group chat is melting. Someone wants to escalate. Someone wants to retreat, negotiate. What do you not change, Tykee?
Our long-term goal, because nothing will change what we want to win.
Great. All right. What are you considering changing within your coalition?
Our process for making decisions, our decision rules, our lanes, just reviewing who owns what, if they have backups.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else you can think of from what we just learned from Survivor?
Yes, our information flow. I think we should refine how many people know things at what time.
Yes. And after a blindside, don't just add more ideas, remove uncertainty. If your backup plan is, hope they don't notice, that's not contingency math. That's denial with a calendar invite.
And that is so sad to see. Campaign malpractice. And now for our power move, the post-blindside reset. It doesn't have to be a complete blindside, but your campaign effort takes a big hit. What do you do next?
Within 48 hours of a loss, you need to update your plan and your strategy. Name what's changed. Name what didn't. This might be harder, but it's only valuable to you if you're being specific. Choose your path, disrupt or consolidate. Either way, reassign lanes as needed.
And you know when you're done, when the next surprise doesn't change your behavior, just your strategy, because that's good discipline.
And next episode, we're going to talk about what happens when the merge breaks, when trust cracks, coalitions fracture, and you have to decide whether to repair the alliance or walk away.
Because surprise doesn't just test strategy.
It tests relationships.
As always, don't forget, hit follow, share, and subscribe, and leave us a review.
Because that's how we find more people ready to win.
Until next time.
Outwit.
Outplay.
Out-organize.